All right, good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, so here we are. I want to thank everyone for joining us in what is our fifth installment of our COVID series of webinars. For those of you new to this webinar series, my name is Jason Flynn, and I am the Director of Human Resources and Client Services for Prestige Employee Administrators. Along with me again this morning is my better half, Carol Sawyer, who is our tax manager here at Prestige. So, it's funny, we were talking each week when we complete these webinars, Carol, myself, and the team, we look around and say to each other, what the heck are we going to talk about next week? And that silence lasts about 30 seconds, and then around a minute later, we already have an agenda. And that's before the inevitable government changes, updates, clarifications that are set forth. So, safe to say, there's plenty to talk about. As for today's agenda, Carol will be taking everyone through the new funding that was voted on and approved last week, as well as to provide some clarification and information around the Paycheck Protection Program Loan Forgiveness Program. Then we'll review some workplace best practices as it pertains to the remote work environment and employee morale. Lastly, before we wrap up the webinar this morning, Carol and I will review some frequently asked questions that we typically do at the end of each webinar. This week it's going to be specifically around the Small Business Association loan and some clarification around what we're seeing out there and what comes into us on a daily basis. So, just as a reminder, all participants will be muted throughout the webinar. However, if you have a question, I do urge you to use the question and answer feature within the webinar and direct all the questions to the panelists. We'll do our best to answer all the incoming questions, and if you're looking for a copy of the presentation, today's slides will be posted on the COVID-19 Resource Center within the Prestige website. So at this point, I would like to pass control of the webinar over to Carol, who can take it from here.
Thank you very much, Jason. Well, first thing we're going to discuss is the new legislation that was signed into law last week, which is H.R. 266, officially called the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. This one doesn't have a catchy acronym like CARES, but that is the name of it. And this was basically all about money. It was not a complicated bill as the CARES Act was. Started with $100 billion in appropriations for health and human services. This is to help the hospitals and the agencies that have been struggling under this crisis, and specifically $25 billion for COVID-19 testing. There was money given to the SBA, $62 billion, my apologies. $50 billion to refund the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, also known as EIDL, and $10 billion for the emergency EIDL grants that went along with those. That was that up to $10,000 that you can get funded immediately when you apply for an EIDL based on $1,000 per employee, and that is a complete grant to you that does not need to be repaid. The additional, if you do the math, I haven't accounted for everything. The rest of the money to SBA was to cover their staffing needs as they have been working long hours and late nights getting all of this taken care of. And the last big piece was the additional $310 billion for more Paycheck Protection Program loans, with $60 billion specifically earmarked for smaller institutions, credit unions, and specifically smaller institutions in economically poorer areas to hopefully get this money to the truly small businesses that need it to open the doors back up. So that's the bill in a summary. It was all about money. There's no new programs. There's just funding for different parts of our economy. Next slide. Paycheck Protection Loan Forgiveness. It is not, well, we're going to, my apologies, we're going to talk about the program itself because there was an interim rule that was released April 23rd of last week, and they do that, SBA does these periodically based on questions and issues that they realized were not covered in the original legislation. First of all, they've made it clear that hedge funds and private equity firms are not eligible for PPP loans. By nature, they're not eligible for any SBA loans and therefore should not be eligible for this loan program either. There was also an interesting aspect in this IFR regarding a limited safe harbor about the certification that everybody made when they signed their application. The application clearly stated you need this money to keep going. And that essentially, if you don't get this money, you're closing your doors, and you're putting everyone on unemployment. If a company borrowed and received a loan prior to this final rule that was issued, and if they've decided they're not real comfortable with the certification that they made on their application, they have until May 7th to repay that money, and it be deemed that they were truthful in the certification that they made on their application. As you've already heard, there are some very large companies that have already given their money back, and there may be more that continue, but this was included in that interim final rule that was issued last week. And we'll again keep you updated if SBA decides to issue another one of these this week, which we're hoping for additional guidance on the loan forgiveness process, as they had promised in the CARES Act. We will most certainly get that information out to you in our weekly client correspondence that we send by email. Next slide. So now we're going to get into the loan forgiveness, which is really the crux of the questions and requests for information that we're getting from you, the clients. First of all, how the loan is spent. 75% of the loan proceeds must be payroll. That is the target you have to hit. It then says 25% of the loan may be spent on other items. A question that we might have later on and that I've received a lot is, well, what if I spend 80% on payroll costs? That's okay. That 75% is a minimum that needs to be spent on payroll costs, but they're giving you some room because they realize you can't pay people if you don't have a building for them to work in and money to keep the lights on. I also want to give a reminder for the exclusions of the costs that are not included as qualified expenses for this loan. The first one is independent contractor expenses, federal payroll costs, the FICA, Medicare, and federal unemployment that you pay on these wages are not a qualified expense, which is why I believe that you are eligible for that FICA deferral as you spend your PPP loan proceeds, and then you will have additional time to pay that money back, as we discussed last week. Also, if you're making any payments to employees under the FFCRA, those emergency paid sick leave and emergency paid family leave, those already have their own tax credits attached to it. So those wages will not be included in the application for forgiveness. Next slide. So again, the 8-week covered period begins the day the loan is dispersed. There are two essential pieces of information that determine your loan forgiveness. The first one has to do with a reduction in headcount. A reduction in headcount compared to what? Well, compared, you have your choice of two different periods, February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, or January 1st through February 29th, 2020. We have a report that we are able to give you that shows you your headcount for both of those periods to know what you will be measured up against, and it is your choice as the borrower to pick which time period you want to use. Your forgiveness will also decrease if the compensation for an employee that makes less than $100,000 is reduced by more than 25%. Specifically, I said less than $100,000 a year because anybody making more than that has been capped at $100,000. So as long as their reduction doesn't bring them under $100,000, it does not matter. Now, those are a lot of words, so let's go into the next slide to give you some numbers to see how this all applies. So let's start by looking at headcount. If you say you get a loan for $100,000, and in your 8-week covered period, your average monthly headcount is 9. I'm sorry, I can't even read my own slide. Your look back period that you've chosen is 10. 9 over 10 is a fraction. It's 90%. And so your loan reduction due to headcount reduction will reduce your forgiveness amount to $90,000. So now you can see when you look at your headcount for your choice periods and what you're currently rehiring, now you can figure out your own fraction and percentage to determine if your loan forgiveness amount is going to go down and what it would go down to. The other thing that impacts it is the salary reduction. So let's say in first quarter of 2020, which is the test period or the control period for this comparison, Abigail earned the equivalent of $80,000 a year. So she made $1,500 and change per week. For whatever reason, in the covered period, Abigail earned a total of $8,000, $1,000 a week for the 8 weeks, which is a reduction of $538 a week. So the loan forgiveness will be reduced by $4,300, which is the $538 per week times 8 weeks. So hopefully this will help you all look at your numbers and understand the words that we've been talking about for quite some time now to apply to what is really happening in your business as you're spending your loan proceeds. What will you need for this application? Well, first off, remember, the bank that lent you the money, they're the ones who are going to be processing your forgiveness applications. So think about the documents that your bank required. That will provide an indication of what they will most likely want for when you apply for forgiveness. We will be able to provide you, first of all, with our loan forgiveness report, which will, after the 8 weeks is done, show you what was spent. We will cap the salaries at $100,000 annually. Their benefit costs will be there, all of your taxes, all of the costs that are considered qualified payroll costs. And then we also have the FTE report that shows your head count for the previous 2 choice periods, so you can know what you are comparing to. You might also need to give a copy of the payroll register report. That's another report that is available out of Prestige Pro, which shows what everyone is paid for every pay period that you run during your covered period. For the other expenses, for rent and utilities, it might be canceled checks, might be payment receipts. They might, you might need to show your bank statement. If your bank statement shows you, say you pay PSE&G direct, they will want to see the bank statement to see that money going out. And on your forgiveness application, you will need to make the same attestation that you did on the application, which is that the current economic uncertainty made the loan request and forgiveness application necessary to support the ongoing operations of your business. As much as I gave you a lot of information, unfortunately, there are still unanswered questions that by today, on April 29th, we had hoped the SBA would give us guidance on. First of all, the fact that the loan forgiveness is it's definitely not taxable at the federal level. We have no idea what the states will do. The question that many have asked, will the payroll expenses during the 8-week period be based on check date or pay date or the pay period? We do not know. I would start the conversation with your lender. I have spoken to one bank that has told us we have no guidance. So there, I do not know what's going to happen with that. Many of you have noticed that in the actual language of the CARES Act, there was, further guidance will be provided. We haven't heard yet. The last thing is the headcount exemption for rehires. There was something in the CARES Act that specifically stated that any layoffs or salary reductions that had occurred recently, you had until June 30th to rehire those people back. Well, what we don't understand is what happens if that date is outside your 8-week period. There will be an forgiveness application process and timeline. It will take some time, which might carry everybody over June 30th. And as long as you can prove at that point, we're really unsure. And once again, all I can say is talk to the institutions that lent you the money, because they are the ones who will be approving or disapproving your forgiveness application. And that is all I have for now.
All right. Thank you, Carol. You know, it's interesting. I can say from a client services perspective, we get a lot of incoming questions every day about pretty much everything that you had discussed. So I'm sure there's people on this call, on this webinar, that have similar questions. So I'm glad that we've been able to provide them with those updates and that information. But at this point, what I'd like to do is shift gears and go through some things, some items and topics that clients, employers have really had to deal with throughout this ordeal. And that revolves a lot around the remote work environment. This is something that employers have truly been forced into, at least over the past month or so, and really likely will in the foreseeable future, at least in some respect. A lot of people are asking if this is going to be the new normal going forward, and it's honestly a really hard question to answer. You know, clearly there's going to be a return to the workforce and office structure that we're used to. That will happen at some point, and I really don't think that's going away. But in a lot of ways, it's going to be a slow progression towards that, and we're going to have to take a lot of precautions along the way. What this means is that there's going to be employees working remotely for a while longer. And while I agree that the quote-unquote office culture will return at some point, and for some like myself, I'd really like it to, we now also have a good understanding just how much some employers can function with a good portion of their employees working remotely. And that's good flexibility to have in the future when you need it. So naturally, again, most organizations have turned to a remote work environment in response to the coronavirus and all of these state closures that followed. In this day and age, staying connected really isn't all that difficult. It's something that we prepared for just by the introduction of new technology into the workforce, but maintaining that structure of your new workplace could be a challenge. So what happens when you can't monitor your employees' work? Again, this is going to require a lot more of an effort and the need to develop different ways, different types of ways to monitor what your employees are doing on a daily and a weekly basis. What if deadlines are suddenly no longer being met by your employees? Or what if complaints are coming in at an all-time high? How do we deal with those in this new normal? You know, what if you're not hearing from your employees at all and they've just ghosted you? Fortunately, over time, you know, we're all going to adapt to this new method of managing and quickly understand who the go-getters are and who might need an extra push. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, as long as the work is ultimately getting done, this is really going to be a new learning experience for everybody involved. And like I said earlier, we've been forced into it, so we have to adapt and move on. Now, morale is a big piece of the puzzle that can be a challenge to tackle, especially now because of the ever-reaching effects of COVID-19, but isolation doesn't work for everyone. The change can almost be refreshing at first, I mean, it was for me. You go home, you get your work done, find out that you work quite a bit more than maybe you did within the office, but it's different, it's new, right? But again, the different environment may not work well for some employees, and we're going to talk more about this in a couple of slides. Equally as difficult is trying to instill an office culture in a work-from-home environment. How exactly do we accomplish this? This is something that we've prepared for. We're going to review this in more detail again over the next couple of slides, but the idea is to try and hold on as much of your structure as you can. You're going to need to be more visible, and honestly, you're going to need to be more creative if you want to stay on top of your employees' engagement. So it's really interesting. What we do hasn't changed, but how we do it definitely has. So let's talk about meetings, this first bullet point here, right? I'm sure there's plenty on this call who would rather have less meetings. And while working from home, it may be easy to forego your regular team meetings, right? Out of sight, out of mind, right? However, it's extremely important not to lose sight of the need to make sure that all your team members are on the same page, and it's going to require more effort. The business doesn't stop now that everybody's at home. So as things need to change and move forward, we really need to lean on our regular meetings to communicate with everybody. And this brings me to my next point, which is communication. Communication to me will always be the most important part of managing your employees. And everybody that knows me can attest to that. Some of us are used to turning to the person next to us, ask them a question, walk down the aisle to another department to collaborate on different things, and that's gone. Now that everybody's at home, the feeling of isolation can truly set in, and employees may feel like they don't have the ability to communicate the way that they did, and a result of that is that they may stop altogether. This is why it's important to put in place and define methods of communication that are available for all of your employees. One great example of this is instant messaging. These instant messaging platforms are a great addition that offer really the ideal functionality. Quick ways to communicate with all your employees or really anybody within the organization, the ability to quickly see if they're available on the phone, in a meeting. It really does give you everything. Additionally, managers may be accustomed to knowing what their employees are doing throughout the day and can usually monitor, what employees' productivity is simply by walking past their desks or checking in or just being mobile throughout the workplace. And there may be new times where new processes need to be put in place to help employees feel engaged and connected. Clearly, we aren't going to be stopping by our employees' homes to check in. That would be weird. So we need to develop alternatives. Schedule check-ins with your teams and your employees over the phone or through video chats like Zoom. Continue to lean on your written policies and processes that are in place right now. They were in place before. You were going to lean on them then. You should lean on them now. And you just may need to dust off those job descriptions. So one-on-ones are truly vital to not only showing support for your team members and your employees, but it's also a way to see where their productivity lies and if things need to be adjusted. These next couple of slides I'm going to take you through really revolve around your employees' morale, not just boosting morale, but once you do that, maintaining it. And employee engagement is something that we always need to be focusing on, regardless of the situation that we're in. So, as I mentioned, and as we talked about a little bit earlier, keeping the morale at a high level can be challenging at any time, but definitely right now. During your regular team meetings, don't feel like everything has to be all work. Give yourself and your team a few minutes at the beginning or end of each meeting to just have a chat. This is something that we employ here within our departments, and honestly, it can be refreshing. I know that when you're on a conference call, you're not in front of people, you just want to dive in and get to work because, frankly, it's weird to have a personal conversation or just a chat with 20 other people on the line, and that can be challenging within itself. But this really does give the team members who haven't seen each other for some time the ability to connect with other people, to exercise those social muscles. It really does help to relax and boost that creativity. It also takes them back to a time that's normal, when they can just shoot off and say, what they need to say and just have fun with certain things. So a lot of this is kind of getting back to that normal of what they did know in the past. Another option would be to schedule some downtime for your employees. There is a great chance that they may be contributing an awful amount of time to their work, because it can be difficult to separate your home office or your home from your work when you're working from home. I speak from personal experience, and everybody that I work with within this organization, the work output increases exponentially working from home. So it's important to keep an eye on that. It's important and it's okay to tell them to take a step back every once in a while. I feel it's necessary. You don't want them to burn out. So factoring in the opportunities for positivity and socialization and fun is a great way for employees to maintain that sense of happiness, keep them engaged in production. What we see here on the screen in that second bullet point is the virtual break room. It's a great way to remind everybody that they need to take a breather now and then. It can be as simple as just having a conversation, or you can inject a little spice into the break by bringing some fun into the picture. So I can say that we recently, over here at Prestige, the Client Services Department, had one of these functions where the HR team had a video chat, and there's quite a few of us, so it was an interesting experiment that we've definitely going to do again. But I made a rule that anyone that talks has to work, or anyone that talks about work has to sing a song in front of 19 other people. Of course, I was the one to break my own rule. Fortunately, I had veto power, so there was no singing on that day. Plus, they've all had the displeasure of listening to me sing at one point or another, so I'd just like to say they made out well. But the purpose of this is that when you have, a manager that cares about your employees' mental health and can actually tell them to take a step back, it can go a long way, and it will also help to increase productivity down the line. Also, again, the remote environment can be very isolating. We went from being around a lot of other people to maybe being around 2 or 3 other people, or nobody, maybe just your cat or your dog or your bird. But video conferencing does allow employees to feel connected and calm. Body language definitely goes a long way, and it's important to help the team members not feel so alone during these times, especially when they may not be used to this type of isolation or this type of remote workplace. Again, it's also, they all are limited by our shelter-in-place rules and guidelines. It's not so simple to just go out and talk to people either. It really is a unique time. Lastly on this slide, now that everyone is at home, the feelings of detachment from the company are common. It's so important, again, with that communication. Communicate with your staff frequently and explain to them what's going on with the business. The times are challenging, but the transparency helps. It truly helps to boost employees' sense of community and feeling like they're a part of the bigger picture. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this last slide I'm going to take you through, which is really revolving around maintaining that morale. Maybe you're already communicating, maybe you're already hosting video chats and keeping yourself available to employees. Right, but the question is, how do we keep it going? First, truly make every effort to keep your one-on-one meetings on the calendar with employees. If you had an open door policy in the physical office, offer drop-in times on a Google Hangout or other platform where the staff can come in and chat. Maintaining prior office behavior creates a feeling of security, and that's important to remember. When the staff is not physically together, it's important, more now than ever, to maintain that sense of team spirit. Personally appreciate the work of individual employees and publicly recognize the great job that they're doing. For your staff, there is nothing that affirms their value more than being recognized by the executive staff. Also, recognition goes a long way with morale and productivity. Your business processes keep everyone working, but them knowing that it's contributing to the business in a positive way keeps your employees enthused and excited about the work that they're doing. Believe it or not, a lot of employees take a great deal of pride in the work that they do and how it translates to positive outcomes. I speak from experience. I see it every single day. Employees take a lot of pride in this. The issue is that they don't always get the benefit of seeing the end result. I feel it's extremely important to highlight these accomplishments with your employees and let them share in the success. They are a huge part of why these things were completed and why these tasks are done and the success of your organization. Let them see that. Highlight where they had a role in that. Also, education, learning power. This empowers any employee to continue growing and enhancing their skill set. A company that encourages employees to learn new skills, take on new challenges, participate in different processes really helps to eliminate that stagnant feeling in their career and keep them moving forward. So lastly, every employee appreciates celebrations. They're actually a large part of our culture here at Prestige. We might not be able to do an in-office birthday party celebration or work anniversaries, but that doesn't mean they can't happen virtually. No matter where employees are, we can make them continue to feel cared for and seen by their team. So listen, a lot of what we're talking about right now is really utilizing that virtual environment, but communicate with your employees. Communicate with them, continue to manage them. It's going to take more of an effort from the management side of things to truly keep things engaged. And conversely, it's going to take more of an effort from employees to have that discipline to work from home when management isn't there. It truly goes hand in hand with the process, and it's important that both know. But the communication, I believe, has to be on top. All right. That wraps up my HR portion of the demonstration. So to wrap things up on this webinar, Carol and I are going to take you through some frequently asked questions. Again, a lot of these are based on the questions that we get directly from employees, that we get directly from employers and businesses. So hopefully some of these questions help tackle the things that have been weighing on your mind as well. So there's the intro slide, and I'm going to move over to the first couple of questions. All right. Do I need to deposit the loan proceeds in a separate bank account? Carol, what do you say?
No, there is no requirement that these funds be segregated into a separate account. Now, I understand the allure of wanting to have them separated to make sure that when you spend that money, it's on the correct level of expenses. I have seen some accountants recommend set up a separate GL account to track the spending of that money. But there is no requirement, and not even specifically an audit recommendation, to put that money in a separate account. That requires juggling a great deal of your banking arrangements and where the account that you pay these bills out of. My suggestion is it's really important to you to have that in a separate bank account, or you may have borrowed it from an institution where you don't have your operating account and they would like it spent out of their account. Then as you spend it from your operating account, transfer the money over to cover the qualified expenses that you have coming out of your operating account.
All right. Next question that we've received is, I have received my loan proceeds. My business is considered non-essential. When should I bring my employees back? Will bringing them back after May 15th affect forgiveness?
So this question was actually posed to us about a week ago, which means at this point they have had their loan proceeds for a week now, which means their 8-week covered period started a week ago. If you wait until May 15th to hire people back, and your headcount calculation is a monthly average of the 8-week period, Then you have one 4-week period with no employees and the next 4-week period with all of your employees, producing an average lower than what you would want. Once again, the purpose of this loan, the whole program, was to get money in the pocket of workers in America. If you wait until May 15th, you're not going to spend it all because you got 2 months worth of salaries. And if you wait till May 15th, you're only going to spend a month. So yes, you're a non-essential business, hire them back, that gets them off unemployment, wages from you, and hopefully at the end of that 8-week period, business has started to open back up and you can safely resume business normally and have the funds to pay through your regular revenues.
All right, next question we have here is, how do I use the loan proceeds so I can get full forgiveness?
Forgiveness is on everybody's minds, but it's simple. Spend the money on what you received it for. A minimum of 75% must be spent on payroll costs. Once again, that is wages, state and local taxes, and benefits. Benefits being a large expense for companies nowadays. And then you can have up to 25% on other costs. Again, if your payroll costs, because of inflation, you actually have a higher head count now than you had last year, take up 80% of your loan, that's okay too.
So the FICA tax deferral is clearly also in everybody's mind as well. So I'm not surprised to see this next question, but this also came in from a client. May I defer the FICA taxes during my loan period?
And the answer is yes. We were a little unsure. Everyone was unsure in the beginning because there is a provision in the CARES Act that says if your PPP loan is forgiven in any part, you're no longer allowed to have the FICA deferral. But you are allowed during the 8-week covered period to defer your FICA taxes, which are not a qualified expense for your loan, and that is 6.2% of salaries up to the limit. So you may defer during the period. At the end of the period, that total amount of deferment goes on the regular repayment schedule that was in the CARES Act, which is 50% at the end of 2021 and 50% at the end of 2022.
All right. So the next question we have listed here came in and asks, if I elect to have the FICA tax deferral, do I need to defer for the entire year?
No, you do not. Obviously, we are all strapped for cash at this moment, and so the FICA deferral is a good thing. But as business picks back up, you don't necessarily want to incur additional debt. So you can turn off the FICA deferral. There will be a notification process. You'll sign, once again, another agreement, send it back to us, please turn it off, and then that amount will be due on the original repayment schedule.
All right, continuing on with the FICA deferral theme, are there any penalties and or interest associated with the deferral?
No, there is not. This is an interest-free loan from the government to businesses.
All right, and finally we have here, what is the process for payment of the FICA taxes in 2021 and 2022?
Very good question. There is no process at this time. I do want to let our clients that are on the line specifically know, we will be reporting these amounts by FEIN, the employer identification number, to the IRS. So at the end of the year, they will know specifically what your FICA deferral was. We anticipate this is going to become a relationship between you and the IRS directly, that you will need to pay them directly and we will not be the middleman. However, at this point in time, we do not know.
All right. That wraps up our FAQs. Thank you, Carol, for your participation in the webinar. As always, I do want to wrap up again by thanking everyone for taking time out of their very busy days to join us for this update this week. Again, Prestige continues to work extremely hard to get as much information out to the public as we can. Please continue to utilize your Prestige support specialists for daily support. This is your HR business partners, payroll specialists, benefit specialists, and everyone else over here at Prestige. We will also continue to send out weekly email updates to all of our clients with information for the coronavirus or COVID-19 related issues. Any responses that came into the Q&A, we will certainly address and get those answered for you. I'd also ask you that if you visit our newly updated Prestige website, you will find our online resource center using the URL listed in this slide on the page here. All of our updates regarding the COVID-19 outbreak can be found in the Resource Center, as well as a ton of information as it pertains to other areas such as payroll, tax, benefits, state and federal compliance. And this is updated on a weekly, if not daily basis. Lastly, should you need any immediate assistance, you can always utilize the new Prestige Go mobile app for a direct link to your dedicated support team. So again, thank you everybody for joining us this morning and for your time, and have a fantastic day.